So, if you're looking for a nice smart telescope, should you go with something like the Seestar S50, that black one on my left, or the Seestar S30, the white one on my right? And both of them are smart telescopes that are controlled via a smartphone application. They have motors and lenses and camera sensors in them, and they will automatically point at targets in the night sky, like the Pleiades Nebula, the Andromeda Galaxy, the Orion Nebula, etc. And then they use a process called stacking, or light accumulation, to reveal details about those targets, even from very light-polluted cities, like here in Tokyo, on my rooftop in Tokyo, where I've done all of my tests of those two telescopes. The Seestar S50 is the older brother of the two telescopes, and it has a 50mm aperture lens at f5, so for a 250mm focal length, whereas the Seestar S30, which is considerably smaller and lighter, has a 30mm lens with a 150mm focal length for also a focal ratio of f5. Both of them have 1080p sensors in them, and the Seestar S50 comes with an adjustable carbon fiber tripod, while the Seestar S30 comes with that very small, simple tripod for kind of more of a tabletop kind of thing. Both of them can be used with standard photography tripods if you're into bringing your own tripod. They both use exactly the same software to control the telescope and to do the light accumulation and processing of the image. And the small one here, the new one, costs $350 compared to the larger one that costs around $500. And so I wanted to see, by pointing those two telescopes at the same time, on the same target, from my rooftop here in Tokyo, Japan, what the actual differences would be in terms of the results of those two telescopes, because after all, the proof is in the pudding. And I think it's very interesting because on paper, we can expect this telescope here to have a wider field of view, but fewer details, and that telescope to have more zoomed in view for a narrower field of view, but more details in the image. I would expect the signal to noise ratio, so how smooth, how clearly you can see the target, to be more or less the same between the two, and this is what we're going to test in this video. I've done the tests with the latest firmware for both of those telescopes, so it has like intelligent denoising features now, and also for both telescopes you don't need to level the scope very precisely because it has a routine to take care of any misleveling that you have. So, which is one of the reasons that this tripod here on the S30 cannot be adjusted, because ZW decided that with their feature they don't really care whether the telescope is level or not, so you don't need to have like adjustable legs, and they can save a buck like that. And anyway, you can bring your own tripod. Anyway, here was my testing protocol. I pointed both of those telescopes using their internal light pollution filter on a nebula called the Pac-Man Nebula. And I let them run on the Pac-Man Nebula at the same time for the same amount of time. And this was all controlled from my smartphone via the Seestar app. And it's fairly easy to switch between the two because each emits its own network, and by switching between networks I can just very easily switch between the scopes. And the Pac-Man Nebula is a fairly small target, so it fits on the native field of view of either of those telescopes. So it's a good target to show you what differences in terms of the field of view we can get between the Seestar S50 and the Seestar S30. I then pointed them to another target, which is a reflection nebula from the Pleiades. And the Pleiades is a very difficult target from here in Tokyo, but nonetheless, I used both telescopes, and I used the mosaic mode that's available in the software of either of those to make sure that I covered the whole nebula, or at least a lot of that nebula, with a roughly similar field of view. And that is where the narrower field of view of the S50 came into play. I really needed to have a larger mosaic setting compared to that one. And with that, I let them both run on the Pleiades for the same amount of time in that mosaic mode. And now we can go ahead and have a look at the results of both of those tests to be able to compare the two telescopes. I'll show you both the raw result straight out of each telescope, as well as the result after I've done some processing with astrophotography processing software called PixInsight. So let's go inside to check that out. Before that, if you like this kind of video and you want to support the channel, you can spend a second to like the video, leave a comment down below to tell me who you think is going to win, have better results. Is it going to be the $500 bigger but older brother, or the new upstart that is $350 US. Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. And if you want to support the channel even more, you may consider subscribing, or if you're planning on buying anything from ZWO, like those telescopes, or Agena, Astro, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking the links that I have in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. And if you want to sponsor the channel directly and be one of those who make those videos possible, you can also consider joining my channel as a member. It's the join button next to the subscribe button, or joining my Patreon as a Patreon supporter. You know it, guys, this channel is only possible because of your support. Thank you so much for your generosity. With that, let's get inside. Okay, so first thing to understand with those two telescopes is the field of view that is covered. So this is something that I showed in a previous video as well, but just to remind you of the difference in field of view for the two telescopes that is due pretty much exclusively to the difference in focal length. In red, you have the Seestar S50 here, the small square that is like towards the center of M42. It cannot cover the entirety of M42, the Great Orion Nebula. And in yellow, this is the field of view of the Seestar S30, the little brother, which has a shorter focal length and therefore it zooms out more. And so that's the yellow. They have the same number of pixels and the same size of pixels, so necessarily the S50 will see more details than the S30 does, because the S30 has to cover a wider field of view with the same amount of pixels. And that is something to keep in mind as we go into this comparison. Now, as a reminder, I used a mosaic on the Pleiades and also a non-mosaic on the Pac-Man Nebula, using the internal light pollution filter of both telescopes. And for the mosaic, due to the field of view differences, for the Seestar S30, I only had to use like a 1.2 times mosaic, which means it's like basically 20% more field of view than the default field of view of the telescope, and 1.6 or even 7 times for the Seestar S50. This is due to its smaller field of view. But in practice, what difference do we see? Let's have a look at the actual results. So first, we are looking now at the results straight out of the telescope. And I have actually two samples of each telescope, one on a night where I had clouds streaming through, and then another one on the left on a night without clouds. And let's start from the left, the night without cloud. The slightly larger one to the left is actually the Seestar S50. And the smaller one is the Seestar S30, the little cheaper brother. And this is the final result straight out of the telescope. I did nothing in terms of processing those images. Those are the JPEG files exported by the telescope after the mosaic was done. And this is the S50. We can see, I mean, this is from Tokyo, so it's pretty cool that we see some areas of nebulosity, even some of the details within the nebulosity of the Pleiades. And the image is overall nice and relatively smooth. And we had a total imaging time of almost 4 hours with the S50 on this mosaic. And at the same time, the S30 was working just as hard, and it managed just over 3 hours of total imaging time. And I do not know what made the difference. I had noticed that the S30, the smaller one, seemed to be keeping more of the subframes for light accumulation than the S50, but obviously, over the same amount of time of imaging, in the end, it's the S50 that had more total imaging time. But let's look a bit on the right. Those are two images taken again with those two same telescopes, S50 on the left and S30 on the right. And I wanted to show you this because we can see, especially on this one, that the S50 needs to cover the whole image with a lot of small subframes, and you can see the result of each subframe being stacked on top of one another, and it's thanks to those clouds that we're able to see that. So the S50 has to do a lot of work, meaning that over that time it spends less time accumulating light for any small portion of the image, compared to the S30, where the field of view that it covers is already much larger, and we can see the field of view there as those rectangles that are visible on the image, and they are much larger. So the S30 has to work less hard. So I expected to have, even with less imaging time in total, I expected to have like more imaging time per surface area of the image effectively, And so I expected to see a signal-to-noise ratio, a smoothness of the image that was higher for the Seestar S30, the smaller, cheaper one, than the S50. But that's not really the case, actually. If I zoom in on both images with the S50 on the left, the S30 on the right, we can see that the S50 overall, it looks much smoother than the S30 on the right. And I think it simply has to do with the lower resolution, well, the worse pixel scale of the S30, which zooms in less than the S50. And so the grain, the noise on a per pixel basis of the S30, even if technically it's supposed to be better in terms of signal-to-noise ratio, from our perception, because it affects larger looking pixels on the final image, then we see it as more disturbing noise. And even on those images, we can see as well that the S30 compared to the S50, so S30 is on the right, 50 is on the left, as expected, the S50 is able to capture more details of the nebulosity compared to the S30. What happens if you were to take the stacked image, the raw image, and then try to process it yourself? We can do that to see exactly what's going to happen. So here is the raw data as gotten from the scope. And I took it and I basically applied exactly the on-rails workflow that I presented in my PixInsight Ultimate Guide video, which is available up above and down in the description, by the way. If you're looking to get started in PixInsight, I think it's the best guide out there, and it really presents workflows that are easy to use and easy to follow. But basically, this is what I get from the S50 on the left. So we start with some color calibration. This is what we get. We do some blur exterminator. We do some noise exterminator to smoothen out the image. We stretch the image and get this. And then we can play with curves by removing the stars, increasing the colors, increasing the contrast. And then in the end, we add back the stars, and this is what we get. And this is from Tokyo, Japan, with a smart telescope, and that's actually not half bad at all. So we get 4 hours total of exposure time as a mosaic. So we've really sacrificed a lot of signal-to-noise ratio per surface area of the image itself. But we see lots of details in the nebulosity. And yeah, it's not bad at all, and you would get a much, much better result in a non-light polluted area. What about the S30 on the right? Well, we do exactly the same thing, same process. So first, spectrophotometric color calibration, followed by blur exterminator, noise exterminator. We stretch the image. We then remove the stars, apply some curves, and then we place back the stars, and this is what we get. And you'll notice that we get a very similar looking image overall, but if you zoom in on areas of the image, I feel like the noise patterns on the image of the S30, which is on the right, is much less smooth than the image on the S50, which is on the left. Also, I feel like if we look at the details of the nebulosity, we see that they're much mushier and sometimes not visible on the S30 compared to the S50. The S50, we can see a sort of V here shape between the lanes of nebulosity. It's completely gone from the S30. So the S50, I thought it would have some aspects where it would be the loser simply because it has such a smaller field of view, but it ends up being the clear winner, at least on this test of the Pleiades. But then it's also $150 more expensive, so I'm not that surprised, but still, it's a very interesting result based on this mosaic. Okay, but what if we're using no mosaic mode at all? We just use the field of view of the scope as is, so that every single image taken for light accumulation is used on the target. So again, took both S30, S50, same night, same location, same everything, pointed them to the Pac-Man Nebula with the light pollution filter, let them run for the same amount of time, and I saw the result. This is the result straight out of the telescope. On the left, we have the S50. On the right, we have the S30. And again, the S50 on the left was able to stack more frames for around 1 hour 45 minutes of data compared to the S30 that was only able to stack 1 hour and 25 minutes worth of data roughly for the same amount of time spent on the target. So this is very interesting. It does show that the S50 seems to have a better tracking overall, even though my initial tests had shown me that was not the case, but like empirical evidence over long periods of times on both the mosaic and this single field of view frame tells me that, okay, the S50 still has better tracking despite having better pixel scale and so requiring better tracking in the first place. And we can see there, the result of the field rotation with those triangles at the top left and bottom right of the image, which we'll need to crop out, and we see them on both telescopes. I also see that for whatever reason, the color balance on the S50 seems to be a bit different than the color balance on the S30. And we also see again, if we zoom into the nebula, so again, this is straight out of the telescope, the S50, just like for the Pleiades, looks much smoother in terms of even signal-to-noise ratio than the S30 does on the right. So S50, S30 on the right. And I think, again, this is due to the pixel scale of the S30, which makes the noise appear worse to our eyes than it does for the S50 on the left. And again, we also see like a vast difference in terms of the details that we are able to see between both telescopes. The S30, we can barely discern something here, right? But it's very visible on the S50. The big advantage, though, that the S30 has is that we can recover more of the field of view. So to show you, if I were to do some cropping on both, I would need to do something like this for the S50. This is what we get to keep from the whole field of view due to that field rotation. But for the S30, the smaller telescope, we're able to really keep a much wider field of view than the S50. So this is something to keep in mind. This particular target basically fits in either case. So it's a win for the S50 regardless. But if you want to capture more field of view at the same time, then yeah, the S30 is your only way to get there. But then we also already saw that with mosaics, the S50 does more than keep its own. So yeah, very interesting final image straight out of the telescope. But what do we get with processing based on the raw frame saved by the Seestar? So these are the raw images. Again, S50 on the left, S30 on the right. And let's start with the S50. We crop the image just like we did. We remove the background. We sharpen the image with blur exterminator. We apply some noise reduction with noise exterminator. We stretch the image. We remove the stars. We do some narrowband normalization. We apply some color curves on the image to really adjust the colors and the punchiness of the image. There we go, it's looking better and better. And then finally, we add back the stars to the image and I reduce the stars a little bit. And this is really good, actually. Really good from Tokyo with a smart telescope, the Pac-Man Nebula. And yeah, it's a really good result overall. Not as good as a dedicated astrophotography rig, but then again, it's not the same price. What about the S30? What can we get? By the way, with the S30, I want to draw your attention that due to the tighter tolerances that they have, I see this kind of comet shaped stars with the light pollution filter that do not occur with the S50. And on the S30, it only occurs for me with the light pollution filter. When you do a mosaic with it, they're gone. So, and anyway, you're going to have to crop them out due to the field rotation. So it's not a big deal, but it was an interesting thing for me to notice. Anyway, S30, let's do exactly the same processing. So we crop the image, we do some gradient removal, we sharpen the image, we apply some noise reduction to it, we stretch the image, we remove the stars, we do some narrowband normalization, then apply some curves to get the nice colors. Then we place back the stars, and this is my final result. And if we compare the two images, I think there is no contest whatsoever between the two. Like the S50 is the clear winner between the two images, but the S30 still holds its own, especially when you consider the cheaper price. It's more portable as well, lighter, etc. But still, when processing with my usual workflow, again, it's in my Ultimate PixInsight guide that I have the link to down in the description. The only area where the S50 loses is in terms of field of view. Everything else, it has a clearer, smoother, more detailed image. So with that, which of those two telescopes should you get? I think it's pretty clear that we see the S50 with its higher price, larger footprint, larger weight, better tripod, etc., is still the clear winner there. And the software between the two is exactly the same at the same time. That said, the S30 is much cheaper than the S50, $150 cheaper, has a wider field of view, is more portable, lighter, etc. So there's definitely pros and cons for each telescope. Now, if I had to choose only one, personally, because I like having the best images that I can get out of the telescope, I would probably go for the S50. But then, when I look back at when I was traveling abroad, every time I ended up discarding the S50 because it was too large for my luggage and going with something smaller like the Dwarf 2 or the Dwarf 3 because the S30 didn't exist at the time. So maybe it's the wrong choice. Maybe the S30 is better for my needs. If you're on a budget, then the S30 is your answer. It is the cheapest smart telescope there is that I'm aware of right now. But if you have a bit more dough and you're willing to spend a little bit more, I would recommend going for the S50 if you can. If you have a lot of dough, you can build your own astrophotography rig. If you like ZW, you could go with something like a small telescope like an SQA55 or a Red Cat 51, together with a mount like the ZW AM3, and then a camera like the ZW 2600 MC Air, and then you have everything ready to do imaging. It's much more expensive, but you'll get much better images. If you have still some dough but less than that, I would recommend probably going for the Seestar S50, and then on the side you can buy something like the Dwarf 3, which I think is superior to the S30 right now, simply due to its availability of equatorial mode. But I'll be doing a follow-up video where I compare the Dwarf 3 to the S30 to the S50, and to make sure you don't miss this video, consider subscribing and clicking that bell icon. So let me know down in the comments what you would be getting if you were getting one of those smart telescopes. Or which one are you currently using? Let me know. It's going to be very interesting to see. I love your comments. I love so many helpful discussions happen in the comments. It's so high quality. I love you guys. I love this community. Seriously, it's awesome. And while you're going there, like the video. It really helps the channel out. Thanks for watching till the end, by the way. That really helps YouTube understand this video is useful. And if you want to support the channel even more and you're planning on buying anything like a smart telescope from ZW, Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking the links that I have in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. And if you want to sponsor this channel directly, you can become a channel member. It's the join button next to the subscribe button, or a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description, and you guys make all the difference. With that, thank you so much for watching what I hope was a really in-depth comparison between the two telescopes. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.